Think you know absolutely everything there is to know about The Undertaker? Well, think again. A life as lived as the dead man's is always sure to have some hair-raising tales. And for the Phenom, a character who terrified countless young wrestling fans during his years under the guise, those scares come from the most unlikely of places. Taker's backstage facts will both amaze and leave you speechless, folks. So let's get to it, because I am Gareth, this is What Culture Wrestling, and here are 10 fascinating WWE backstage facts about The Undertaker. Number 10, he wrestled Kane elsewhere before their first WWE match. The Undertaker was one of the first in the then WWF to see something in Glenn Jacobs. On the 4th of August 1995, Taker even toured down to Smoky Mountain Wrestling for Jim Cornette's Super Bowl of Wrestling show, and worked opposite Unabomber in a featured bout. That proved to be a life-altering occasion for Jacobs. It told The Undertaker one thing: this Unabomber could be a future Federation opponent. The dead man was so impressed by Glenn that Vince McMahon ended up booking the new monster on a run of house shows later that year. Jacobs debuted as Jerry Lawler's mean dentist Isaac Yankem, and his WWF career was off to the races. That might not have happened had Taker not put in such a good word. Years later, Yankem morphed into Kane and had one of the most memorable feuds in WWE history versus his kayfabe brother. And it's fascinating to think that this all kicked off on a Smoky Mountain card Taker was only guesting on during a bleak period for his iconic gimmick. Is Kane Taker's biggest and bestest rival of all time? Well, if he's not, you tell me who is in the comment section down below. Number 9, the American Badass arrived sooner than you think. Late 1999 was another quote-unquote bleak period for Taker. Fans tuning in to certain episodes of Raw witnessed him droning on and on and on and on about riding motorcycles in the desert with Big Show or something. Around that same time, the iconic stalwart began making shoot-style comments during promos and on guest commentary. It was all decidedly very un-Undertaker. Clearly growing bored of his outlandish gimmick, Taker toned down the supernatural and demonic characteristics he'd been showing since 1990. That started in the summer of '99. Then he vanished from screens in September for a much-needed break. Once the dead man returned in May 2000, the American Badass biker years began. In truth, the template for that character started before The Undertaker took time off to heal up injuries and contemplate his future. He was under huge pressure at the time, and even admitted via YouTube that many behind the curtain tried to talk him out of repackaging his persona. But the dead man does what he wants. Number 8, Taker is afraid of cucumbers. This might be common knowledge amongst wrestling fans by now, but it's still bloody hilarious. Apparently, one of WWE's most feared creations gets rather anxious around the humble cucumber. Several peers have gone on record to say Taker just does not like them. If only famous foes like Mick Foley, Steve Austin, and Kurt Angle had known that, would have definitely made things interesting. The Undertaker himself has claimed that he isn't outright scared of cucumbers. That'd be ridiculous. But definitely is not a fan when they're lying around. That must have made trips to WWE catering hell, especially when the Phenom approached a salad bar. It's almost incredible that company writers didn't try to play on this at one stage. Maybe Taker made it clear he just would not be game for some cucumber-inspired TV hell. Cucumber on a pole match, anyone? Actually, come to think of it, that wouldn't really work. The Undertaker would just run a mile, wouldn't he? You wouldn't see that big supernatural git for dust. Number 7, the dead man took naps in coffins. The Undertaker worked a fair few coffin matches back in the day, so it wasn't uncommon for coffins to litter the backstage hallways of arenas across the country. They were not prop caskets either. Bruce Pritchard has said via his podcast that he and others would go to funeral homes seeking the real deal. Hilariously, and likely because he was sick and tired of being bothered when he fancied some downtime, Taker has also revealed that he'd occasionally go for a sly nap in one of the things. That way, he was practically guaranteed 40 winks without anyone hassling him for promos, photo shoots, or anything else. Some poor stagehand would have likely crapped their drawers had they gone to move that casket, heard some mumbling, opened the lid, and saw the effing Undertaker having a snooze inside. Who knows how many times the guy did this, but it definitely happened more than once on the road. Talk about staying in character, and he could finally rest. in peace. Number 6, WCW told him he'd never draw money. Prepare to have your mind blown, folks. Pre-Undertaker, Mark Calloway worked in WCW as Mean Mark Callis. It was a generic name, but everyone has to start somewhere, right? Could have been worse, the dude could have been called Bugger Red or something drastically awful like that. Alright, yeah, those were the days. Seriously though, Callis was considered a bit of a prospect in the late 1980s, at least by some. Ole Anderson was not one of those people. He outright told a future great that he'd never draw a dime in the pro wrestling business. It was a shattering comment from someone in a position of power, and it made Calloway realize that his days were numbered in WCW. The WWF had come knocking by that point anyway. Obviously, nobody knew for sure what epicness was coming next in 1990, but Ole looked like a total fool for shooting down a guy who'd become one of Vince McMahon's most prized workers for the next 30-ish years. Let's just say Taker drew several dimes after that. Cheers for watching this video today. Hit that subscribe button down below for more What Culture lists and so much more in your life. Number 5, that weird time he almost left WWE. The next two entries kinda go hand in hand together, and they could have ended in disaster for the WWF. By 1996, The Undertaker was getting a wee bit sick of the company's cartoonish style. It might surprise some to hear that, but things escalated to the point that he genuinely looked sideways at what pals like Kevin Nash were doing in WCW, and wondered if he'd be better off taking the plunge. Imagine he had. Taker told Ariel Helwani in early 2023 that he was absolutely tempted by what WCW were doing on the other channel. The NWO was starting to catch fire even before Hulk Hogan turned heel to properly form the group. Both Nash and Scott Hall had shed their WWF personas to become grittier characters, and that appealed to the dead man. Then something magical happened, and enabled him to showcase a different side in ring. Taker sped his ring work up just a tad, and that kept him happy. Who knows how different history would have been had he left for WCW after all. He probably would have just ended up in an NWO shirt like everyone else, let's be honest. Number 4, he told WWE their opponents sucked. 1993 to 1996 saw Taker largely feeding on scraps in some of the worst matches that WWF ever put on. He was tasked with pulling something or anything out of lumbering sorts like Giant Gonzalez, King Kong Bundy, and Mabel. Unsurprisingly, the guy wondered if this was some sort of sick joke that gave management a giggle. He told Bruce Pritchard, one of Vince McMahon's closest lieutenants, that their booking flat out sucked. Pritchard has spoken about this on his podcast more than once, and freely admits that his pal was less than pleased by the way he was constantly landed with cumbersome monsters who were either green as grass or over the hill. It's no wonder he contemplated a change of scenery by 96. In essence, the arrival of Mick Foley saved Taker's sanity and made him realize that WWF was best for him after all. The legend just couldn't stomach more rivalries against McMahon's slow-moving, often clumsy giants, and nobody can really blame him for that. Number 3, Vince McMahon banned him from strip clubs. Kevin Nash once said on his Click This show that Vince McMahon pulled both he and Taker into his office one day to give them some news. Both were henceforth banned from attending strip clubs on the road. This ban came into effect in the mid-1990s. Why? Well, Vince wanted to protect their clean-cut babyface image. Obviously, this concept is a bit unfortunate in 2024. McMahon has been disgraced for his own behavior behind the scenes. However, back in the mid-90s, he wanted both The Undertaker and Diesel to quit hitting strip joints in between shows. It's unclear how rigid this sudden policy was, but it likely would have come with financial penalties had the pair ignored it. Nash wasn't long for the WWF anyway, and it's unlikely he had the same directive in WCW. Eric Bischoff was just giddy to have one of Vince's biggest stars on his books, so keeping someone like Kev happy would have been a priority. That was not the case for Nash and Taker on the Federation side though. Number 2, Undertaker choked Kurt Angle out for real. There are contradicting reports on exactly when this incident happened. Taker has said it was on the infamous plane ride from hell, but that was in 2002. He also name-checked Insurrection 2001 when telling the story, so things get a bit confusing. Calloway has maintained one thing though, he was a bit out of it after suffering an ear injury versus Steve Austin and Triple H in the UK. 2001 it is then. Maybe. Mid-flight above the Atlantic, The Undertaker saw Kurt Angle and Vince McMahon man brawling. Stirred from his snooze and without context, he charged into the melee and started choking Angle out for real from behind. That's when the icon realized that both guys had actually been play fighting due to boredom. Kurt wasn't actually attacking the boss without cause, and so Taker's run-in wasn't really merited. It was carnage, and this story is one of the tamest from those UK trips. Number 1. Bizarre punishments in Wrestler's Court. The idea of Wrestler's Court will always sound daft and childish to those outside the industry. In fact, scrap that. It sounds daft and childish to those inside the business too, because it is. That didn't prevent countless workers from going on trial in some kangaroo WWE court, set up for various alleged misdemeanors on the road. What's the old expression? There's more drama behind the curtain than there is in front of it. Yeah, that just about works for this utter nonsense. The Undertaker regularly presided over the court as judge, and he was the only one to dole out punishments accordingly. Often that meant those convicted had to buy him some booze, or keep others on the roster sweet with gifts. It sounds weirder the more it's explained, doesn't it? And sometimes things got out of hand. Taker himself has explained one occasion on YouTube that involved Melina and several others. He didn't go into painstaking detail, but did reveal that things took a pretty serious turn as far as the defendants were concerned. Yikes. It is a weird old business, isn't it? Did you enjoy this 10 fascinating WWE backstage facts about The Undertaker list? Then go and watch this other video about an all-time WWE legend. It's called 10 fascinating WWE backstage facts about The Rock, and it, well, rocks. Bye-bye!